The Physiological Psychology of Learning a Language. Welcome to my TED Talk. Communication is everything. Humans require the ability to convey thoughts to each other, to be productive, and survive. Language creates a method to depict our ideas to one another through oral and written communication. These dialects allow us to collectively conceive innovative ideas. I probably don't need to tell you how essential communication is. But have you ever thought about how significant it is to understand the biopsychological aspect of learning a language? I have recently begun learning the Korean language Hangul as my third language, having learned Spanish in my teenage and adult years. I'm learning Korean because it is my boyfriend's first language. He is a South Korean citizen and has studied English for over 20 years. His ability to use English is impressive. He remarkably is even earning his third master's degree in his second language. I have learned the Hangul alphabet in 30 days, and I have been learning words and phrases for over 60 days. This fascination with learning a third language has allowed me to meet people who speak various languages. Meeting so many people capable of memorizing and understanding different dialects has made me curious to learn about the physiological explanation of the psychology of learning language. Learning a new language involves listening, speaking, reading, writing, sometimes even a new alphabet and writing format. Researchers have discovered that the best time to learn a new language is during the sensitive stage in the early stages of development. Although adults have shown a superior ability to memorize the vocabulary of a second language, children have the upper hand in developing new grammar and pronunciation. This means that it is more feasible for children to master languages fluently than for adults. Individuals who begin learning a second language beyond age 12 or so almost never reach the level of a native speaker. So you might be wondering why that is. To understand this, we must dive deeper into the physiological explanation for learning a new language. The use of languages consists of the brain processing input and output data, as shown here. So there's listening, reading is input, and speaking and writing are the output. The output process consists of two stages. The lexical stage occurs in the cerebral cortex when an individual chooses a suitable descriptive lexical item or lemma. Next, in the phonological stage, the brain analyzes the sound composition of the lexical item for expression. The superior temporal lobe recognizes the oral expression and is stimulated while hearing speech. The neuroanatomical pathways and functions involved in the process of learning a new language involve many regions of the brain. These regions include Broca's area in the inferior frontal gyrus, including Wernicke's area in the superior temporal gyrus, as well as parts of the middle temporal gyrus, and the inferior parietal and angular gyrus in the parietal lobe, including the primary motor cortex, primary somatic sensory cortex, primary visual cortex, primary auditory area, and posterior speech areas. Our brains can process acoustic data and then compose a response. We then orate the response. To materialize learned language behavior, many neuroanatomical pathways occur in both of the brain's hemispheres. Dialects require both input and output data processing consisting of lexical, semantic information, and phonological information processing. The cerebral cortex helps us to process language. Identifying orated words is regulated by the neural systems in the superior temporal lobe, superior temporal gyrus, and the superior temporal sulcus bilaterally. Likewise, listening to speech arouses the superior temporal lobe. The parasylvian cortex is also vital in learning language. Psychiatric investigator Angela D. Friedrichi conducted a comprehensive review of the literature concerning the brain operations and systems in use during sentence cognition and how they develop as the sentence is perceived. The parasylvian cortex is essential in vocabulary processing. Language usage requires systems such as acoustic phonological analysis, which is the perception of sound and processing of the words. The temporal lobe manages the processing of acoustic data. Lastly, the separable temporofrontal networks and the temporofrontal network are necessary for language development. Learning a language is connected to physiological psychology in many ways. For one, we can analyze the psycholinguistics of learning a language and how this field has allowed us to identify historical and current approaches to better teach language to learners. Psycholinguistics is a field in which research is conducted on how psychology relates to language learning. Historical approaches to learning a language are classroom curriculum, flashcards, textbooks, and social practice. Current approaches in the modern world include, but are not limited to, e-learning, task-based learning in social media, podcasting for oral language learning, digital storytelling for auditory language learning. One recommendation I have, based off of physiological psychology of language learning, in order to more effectively learn a language, would be to use spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is the practice of studying the same information during short periods, constantly over time, as opposed to cramming a lot of information over a short period of time. The phenomenon was first documented by Ebbinghaus in 1885, using himself as a subject in several experiments to memorize verbal utterances. Revisiting words frequently will allow for memorizing words in the long-term memory, while studying words for an exam only keeps the words in the short-term memory. A second recommendation I have in order to help with the efficacy of learning a language would be utilizing synesthesia. Synesthesia is a phenomenon that occurs when one sense stimulates another. Synesthesia would help a person as they develop a new language by utilizing this as a tool. One, for instance, could correlate words to colors to help the learner differentiate between two similar words in the same rule. For example, a study done by Watson et al. Showed that synesthesia helps children memorize, categorize, and understand certain kinds of grammar. This can be a helpful tool to utilize these different colors when teaching new lessons on grammar and vocabulary in language learning, as the brain can help pick up in the correlating concepts, in turn developing synesthesia. The neuroanatomical structure that is in play in synesthesia is the cerebral cortex. People reporting synesthesia have increased amounts of gray matter in certain brain areas and altered connections to other areas. The neurotransmitters that relay information between those structures during synesthesia are the Y-aminobutyric acid, GABA, and serotonin. A third recommendation I have to help with the efficacy of learning language would be to use the alter ego method. A recent study carried out by Jason Moser, a psychologist, neuroscientist, and professor at Michigan State University, tested whether addressing yourself in the third person using the pronouns he, she, and it could help control stress by putting a psychological distance between yourself and your emotions. A group of people was asked to think about some harrowing images in third-person self-talk, whilst Moser examined the electrical activity in the brain. The results of the electroencephalogram identified a significant reduction in emotional response, and no additional effort or processing took place elsewhere in the brain, thus proving that using the pronouns he, she, and it was an automatic process. Emotionally detaching from ourselves could help us overcome the fear, embarrassment, and inhibitions of speaking another language. By adopting a foreign language alter ego, we could establish an emotional and linguistic distance from ourselves, I and me, to our multilingual counterparts. Ethical considerations and research limitations in biopsychological processes that might influence the implementation of these three recommendations could be that the data could mislead people if given in the wrong setting. For example, if inconsistent details are published online, people could become led astray. Many research limitations in biopsychological processes would affect implementation of these three recommendations. For example, the impact on individuals who may be neurodivergent or may face mental health challenges may not be able to effectively participate in the research. For instance, if someone is colorblind, they will not be able to utilize the synesthesia as effectively due to not being able to see the different colors. In conclusion, developing the skill set of a new language can be a fun adventure. In it, you learn how to communicate with people outside your scope of culture. Finding ways where the vocabulary, phrases, and alphabet will stick into your long-term memory is essential in learning language. With these recommendations of space, repetition, synesthesia, and alter ego, you can develop language faster by utilizing the physiological psychology of language learning to your advantage. Knowledge of physiological psychology and how the brain functions is a vital tool to discover more effective ways to learn. Thank you. Here's my references list. It is continued. And continued again. Thank you.